Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my July wrap-up. July was actually a pretty good reading month for me. I read like 12 or 13 books. I can't remember exactly now. But that's a lot of books for me, and I liked quite a few of them. Also, the majority of those books were physical books, and I listened to some audiobooks too, but I'm really glad that I got through some of my physical books because I feel like I have been listening to a lot of audiobooks recently, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to get through more of my physical TBR. But let's get started. This is probably going to be a little bit long because I have a lot of books to talk about. So the first book that I read in July was Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel, which is the first book in the Themis Files. So this is an adult science fiction that I think is pretty popular. And so it starts with this young girl who is riding her bike at night, and she falls into a hole and falls into a giant metal hand, and nobody really knows what it is. Then it skips forward quite a few years, and we're following the same girl, but now she is an adult. She has become a scientist, and she gets assigned to a project which happens to be that they have rediscovered this giant metal hand, and now they're trying to figure out what it is, where it came from, what does it do, is there is there more to this metal body that this hand came from. And so she becomes part of this team of scientists who are trying to figure all of this out. And there are a lot of things that I think this book did well. I think that especially the audiobook is a really great audiobook. The whole book is told in the format of records and interviews and journals and things like that. And listening to it in audiobook form worked really well because it was a full cast audiobook, so everybody has different voices, and especially for the interviews it works really well because you can hear the different voices speaking back and forth, and that's really great. And I think that if I hadn't listened to it as an audiobook, I don't think I would have gotten through this book. But I think the format of it being in documents and interviews kind of caused problems for me because it created a lot of distance in the story. Because what we were seeing would be, we were hearing an account of an interview of someone telling a story about something that already happened previously, which for me personally was too far removed from the story itself. I like to be in the story with the character. I want to know, what does it feel like to be there? And that just created too much distance for me between myself and the story and the characters. I also think that for me, it's not really the kind of science fiction that I like. I think I was expecting it to be maybe more spacey or more speculative, futuristic or something, but it is science fiction, but it's very real world. It kind of takes place in an alternate present day. It has a lot of stuff about this scientific project working with, the US government, and then dealing with the political relations between different countries and governments. This felt like a contemporary, but with a robot. And so that's also something that for some people may work really well. May work really well for people who don't want something that's too out there. But for me, I just was I don't really want to be reading about politics and government and military in the real world. I just that's not interesting to me. For some reason it's interesting if it's in an imaginary world, but in the real world I'm just no, I don't care about this. So that was just a thing that didn't work quite well for me. So overall, I gave this book 3 stars because I think that there are a lot of things that it did really well, and there are also a lot of things about it that other people may like, and I can see why people like it, but it really was not my thing. Next, I listened to the audiobook The Lost Sisters by Holly Black, and this isn't actually really an audiobook, it's more a short story that goes between The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King, so it's 1.5 in The Folk of the Air, and it's essentially a letter that Taryn, Jude's twin sister, is writing to Jude to kind of explain herself after the events of The Cruel Prince. So it really is just giving her perspective on different events from The Cruel Prince, and also her reasoning for why she did what she did. And You know, it was interesting. I really don't like Taryn. Like, Taryn's the worst. I wasn't sure how to rate it, but I did 3 stars. A good, like, middle of the road rating. Then I listened to another audiobook. The beginning of the month I had a lot of audiobooks, but I listened to another audiobook, which was the Unnie Mooners by Christina Lauren. So this is a contemporary romance, which is not my usual genre, but everybody has been talking about this book and loving it, and I thought I would give it a try. And it was really fun. You know, it was the kind of book that I went into it like not expecting anything too complex. I was just expecting it to be like, there's a romance, it's gonna be fun, and that's exactly what I got. It was a lot of fun to read. We're following Olive, whose sister is getting married, and at the wedding, everybody in the wedding party and like all of the guests get sick. They all get like food poisoning or something. And the sister cannot go on her honeymoon because she is too sick to go, but it is a non-refundable honeymoon that she won. And so in order to not waste it, she tells Olive to go on this honeymoon. And they also tell the one other person from the wedding party who didn't get sick, which is the groom's brother, to also go on the honeymoon, so that the two of them can like go and enjoy it since nobody else will. The thing is, these two people hate each other, so it has a lot of really fun tropes of like fake dating, or in this case fake marriage, fake newlyweds. There's like, they have to share a bed at one point, there's misunderstanding. There are a lot of, you know, romance tropes, but they're a lot of fun. Like, I don't have a very in-depth review of this book other than it was very fun to read. I gave this, I think, 4 out of 5 stars because it was such a fun ride. Then we have the first physical book of the month, which was The Queen of Blood by Sarah Beth Durst. This is the first book in the Queens of Renthia series, and this is one that takes place in this magical world where there are all of these like nature spirits, and the people a lot of times like they all live in forests and they live in trees, and they have whole villages that are like up in the trees, which is really cool. But all of the nature spirits in this world are malevolent. They want to kill humans, essentially. And there are people in this world who have the ability to control or manipulate the spirits, and the strongest of those people then becomes the queen of this land. And so she kind of has dominion over these nature spirits to keep people safe. And then there are all of these other people who also have like have this power to a lesser degree, who just kind of run around doing other stuff to keep people safe. The main character that we're following, Delena, very young, discovers that she has some degree of this power to influence these spirits. And so she goes to a school to learn how to refine these abilities and practice these abilities to control the nature spirits. But she doesn't really fit in with the other people there. She's not as powerful as a lot of the other kids who are at this school. But she has other qualities that make her exceptional in her own way, because she is very observant and clever and quick thinking and you know, and adaptable and things like that, which I really liked about her character. We then find out that there is corruption in this world and in the government and among the royalty. The queen has some personal problems that are causing her to put the country at risk. I thought that this story was pretty like standard fantasy. There wasn't a lot about the story itself that was especially like new or interesting. I thought the world and the magic system were interesting. I liked the nature vibes of the world. I liked that there were the nature spirits. It was an interesting kind of magic, that the people couldn't do direct magic, but they could control magical creatures or magical spirits in order to get things done. I wanted it to be more like dark and vicious than it was, because I was like really on board for these like, you know, killer nature spirits, and like they were there, but I wanted more of it. There were a couple nature spirits that were like very creepy, but they were they were such a small part of this. I wanted so much more. As I said, the story was pretty basic, I thought. but the world was the point where it had the potential to be really interesting and different. And I just didn't feel like it leaned into that enough when it really could have. So I'm intrigued enough to read the next book. I'm not like super excited, like running to read it, but I think that I probably will at some point. But if you read this series, let me know, does it get better? Like, does it get darker? Does it get more complex? Because I also felt like the politics could have been more complicated. Things just like weren't explained as much as I wanted. But yeah, so like let me know, like, is it worth continuing? Is the second book good? Does it go deeper? Does it get more complicated? Does it expand the world? Did the spirits get more like dark and creepy? Like, I just want to know, should I read the next book? Let me know. And also, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read a book of poetry that wasn't like really poetry, but it is Heart Talk by Cleo Wade. So this, I'm saying it's not exactly poetry because it says poetic wisdom for a better life, which I think is more accurate than calling it poetry, because it's not really poetry. It's more like advice and like pep talks in poetic language. And I just like didn't love it. I'm not sure why I got this one. Once I started reading it, I was like, why did I get this? This is not something that I would usually like. Because the thing is, as much as I am trying to read, you know, more kinds of poetry, I've discovered that I don't love poetry that is trying to give you advice. I also just like don't really like pep talks that much. Like, that's really not what I'm looking for out of my poetry. I also felt like the pep talks in this, like, you know, very positive, nice stuff, but also very surface level. And so I just was like not that into it. I didn't rate this because I've kind of decided at this point that I'm not going to be rating poetry anymore because I just like don't know how, and also it feels weird. So I didn't give this a rating, but it just like was not the thing for me. Then I read This Savage Song and Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. I actually read these a couple weeks apart and some stuff in between them, but I read them both in July, so I'm just going to talk about both of them now. So these follow two main characters, Kate and August. Kate is human, which is relevant to this world, and her father is a very corrupt person who essentially has control of the city that they live in. And at the beginning, Kate aspires to be like her father. Her mother has died. Her father is the only family she has left. Her father has also sent her away to many boarding schools, which she does not like, and she wants to come back home. And so she thinks the best way to do that is to emulate her father and convince him that she is just like him and that she can inherit his legacy of, I don't know, controlling this city and just being a horrible person. Then we follow August as well, who is a monster. So in this world, when someone does something terrible, mostly I think it's focused on murder, and then there are kind of 3 categories, whether it is like an accidental murder or if it is like a mass murder. It creates different monsters. All of that like badness that is like put into the world by murdering somebody kind of condenses into a monster. And so there are 3 kinds of monsters that have different kinds of abilities, but August does not want to be a monster. He wants to be a good person. He wants to be human, actually. He has tried very hard to learn to emulate humans. But he also lives on the other side of the city. So the city is kind of split into 2 sections. It's the north and the south, and one of them is controlled by Kate's father and the other is controlled by August's father, and they have a feud going on between these 2 sides. August is given an assignment to essentially spy on Kate to find out more about her and her father, but they soon find that there are larger conspiracies and problems and monsters going on in this world that they need to deal with, and Kate and August end up teaming up as an unlikely pair. And I had a really fun time reading these. I burned through these really fast. Each of these books, you know, is I think like around 500 pages. No, this one's 400 pages. This one's like 500 pages. But each of these, I read them in about a day. I burned through them real fast. I think this one may have taken me like a day and a half. But there's always something about Victoria Schwab's writing that I find very easy to read, very engaging. These are not my favorite books by her. These are not books that I would like rave about. They were definitely fun. I had a good time reading them, and they are really fast reads. I just find her writing super engaging. But I wasn't the most invested in this story. I wasn't super invested in these characters. I think there was a lot about these books that were underexplained, especially the magic system. There were questions that I did not have answers for, and I felt I really needed in order to fully engage with this story. Also, there were a lot of things that seemed like inconsistencies. Like, the rules of this world weren't explained, but there were definite inconsistencies that I saw in like statements that they would make earlier in the books, which then like they just went back on later on. So even like the small amount of rules that we did have were not consistent, which like was very annoying to me. So, you know, I had fun reading these. I think I gave each of them 4 stars because just for the fun value, and they were just very enjoyable to read. But I also think there were a lot of problems with like the world and the magic and the consistency and how the characters were built. I just was not like invested in them, and some of that might be because I read these so quickly. Maybe I would have been more invested if I had read them more slowly. I don't know. Then I read Tortal, A Spy's Guide by Tamara Pierce. So this is not a novel, but just like a companion book that goes with her Tortal like world and multiple series that are in that world. So it has a lot of like documents and things in it. So there are letters in here. There's other kind of like correspondence. There's also there are like manuals pretty much in here about like how to be a spy. There are timelines, there are profiles of different characters and things like that. And so a lot of it is about George from Pirate Swoop and him being spy master. So a lot of this is stuff that like has passed through him and some of the letters that he's written. So the thing that I found most fun about this was really the letters between the characters, because we get letters from some characters that like I've heard of before, like his children, but have never interacted with that much. So we get to have some letters back and forth between them. We also get to catch up on just like what are some other characters doing? What are they up to in between books or after these books have happened? So it was really fun to just get like little glimpses into their lives. I think the least fun part about this were the parts that were like manuals. Like there are at least like 2 sections that are very long that are just like literally like manuals and guides about like how to be a spy. This is how you like do spy things. And it got very boring, but overall I enjoyed this. I didn't rate it because it was another one that I'm like, I don't know how to rate this. Like whatever this is, I don't know how to rate this. Then I listened to Doll Bones by Holly Black, which is a middle grade book about 3 kids who all have this like imaginary game going on that they play together, and they all have different like action figures and dolls and things that they play with. But there's this one antique doll that they always look at and they call the Queen, and eventually they start to suspect that the Queen is haunted and that she actually has the spirit of a little girl trapped in this doll, and that it is their job to essentially find this little girl's grave and bury the doll there so that she can rest. And for them, while they're going through this adventure, it is unclear to them whether this doll is truly haunted or if they are just kind of playing along because they want it to be an exciting game and adventure. And this one I thought was okay. I didn't love it. I kind of wanted it to be like darker and creepier, but also it's like a middle grade, so maybe that wouldn't be appropriate for this. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill, which I read this as part of the Middle Grade Magic Readathon, which is a readathon all about reading middle grade books. And this is one that I've heard a lot of stuff about, so I was interested to test it out. It takes place in a small village where they believe in the surrounding forest there is a witch who eats children, and in order to keep her happy and not like attacking them, every year they have to sacrifice the youngest child and leave like a baby out in the forest for the witch to eat. Turns out though, there is a witch in the woods. She's not an evil witch. She doesn't eat babies. All she knows is that for some reason every year a baby appears in the forest and she doesn't know why. So she takes that child and brings it to a different town to find it a new home and let it have a happy life. While she travels, she can't carry a lot of food with her, so what she does is she collects starlight and feeds starlight to the child, and that's totally safe for them. But one year she takes a baby and she is not paying attention and accidentally collects moonlight and feeds moonlight to this child, and moonlight has magic in it, and so she has infused this child with magic, which means she can't really just place a magical child in just anybody's home, so she decides to keep the child with her and raise her. This one, I just like couldn't get into it, and I don't have like real reasons why. I think the writing style didn't work for me. I just never felt fully invested in this world or the story or characters. So I didn't love this. I very much think that's just like a personal preference. I don't think that it is a bad book. I actually gave this to my mom to read because it seemed like something she would like, and she absolutely loved it. I just think there was something about it that was off for me, and apparently I didn't take any notes while I was reading this, so I don't remember why. But I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I read this while I was on vacation. I was camping with my family, and this one, you know, I've heard a lot of mixed things about it. I think I'm in the camp of not really being a fan. So the basic premise of this is that we're following a girl who lives in a human world that is adjacent to the fairy world. She is an artist. She paints portraits, and in this world, the fae cannot create anything, otherwise they die. So they commission humans to create things for them. She is the best portraitist that there is, and so the fae court very often will come to her for their portraits. The Autumn Prince comes to her for a portrait. The two of them hit it off a little bit, although it is against the fairy laws for humans and fae to fall in love, but they have like their little flirtation thing going on. And then she makes the mistake of painting human sorrow into the prince's eyes, which then sends him into a fury, and he comes back to take her to the fairy world. Somehow it's going to make it better. Now with this, I went into it knowing that it was going to be very romance focused, but I still think it was more romance focused than I was expecting, because I was expecting there to like still be some other kind of plot, and there really isn't. It's just romance. There's no other plot going on in this story, and I think that was something that kind of hindered my enjoyment of it. I wanted there to be a little more something to it. Sometimes there were hints about like another plot that could happen. It was never explored. There are a lot of things that sounded interesting and then weren't explained. I didn't really like the romance in this either, because I felt like it felt very rushed and very shallow. I also have some mixed feelings about the writing style. I've heard that it is very atmospheric, which I agree with somewhat, because I think the writing style was very inconsistent. There were some parts that were beautifully written, that were very atmospheric and descriptive and just great. And then there were some parts that were, I think, kind of poorly written or very awkwardly written, or just written in a way that didn't match the setting, the characters, the tone, the other parts of the book that were nicely written, it just was not consistent, and that made it feel more jarring and awkward, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Disenchanted, The Trials of Cinderella. This is the second book in the Time series, which is a middle grade fairy tale retelling. This is a retelling of Cinderella, and I listened to this in audiobook, but then I really liked it, so I decided that I wanted to own the physical copy, so now I have the physical book as well. And this one was probably my favorite book of the month. I really enjoyed this, and I was surprised because it had a rough start for me, but by the end I loved it. So in classic Cinderella style, Cinderella's mother has died, her father has remarried, and Cinderella now has been moved from the small town or village that she lived in, and now lives in the city and is going to a very fancy, pretentious, like boarding school, essentially, with the most elite people of the country, including the prince. And Ella feels very out of place in this new world that she has been thrust into, especially because she does not share the same perspective or values as many of the people who she's going to school with now. At the beginning of the book, I found Ella's character to be very annoying. Not that she is wrong, because she's a character with a lot of convictions, and I think that she is correct in a lot of her convictions. A lot of the story is about like workers' rights, and she is not incorrect in her convictions. I just thought she was a very annoying character, and the way that she went about it was very like narrow in her approach, I think, which also, I mean, she's like a child in this, so I think that's understandable. But she does grow and expand her perspective over the course of the book, which I really liked. And I think that she is able to make some real change in her world because of how much conviction she has, which I really liked about her. As I said, this book has a lot to do with workers' rights. It has a lot to do with like privilege and social responsibility. It tackles, you know, equality and even things like fast fashion, but also, you know, compassion and empathy, and just it tackles like so many things, and I just thought it was so good. It was so well done. I really enjoyed this. By the end of it, I really liked Ella's character. I think that she stayed very true to herself. She doesn't change who she is, but she grows throughout the story, which I really loved. I liked the romance in it. It wasn't overpowering, but it was definitely present, and it was very cute. And I appreciate how much Dash, the prince, also like grows and learns and is willing to learn. And one of the things that I also really liked about this was that it didn't take the evil stepmother route, which is, you know, a very prominent part of the Cinderella story, is the evil stepmother, but it didn't do that. It has a stepmother in it. She hates the stepmother, but they don't just fall into a very simplistic, like bland evil stepmother character. They make the stepmother more complex than that. I also liked that while there are some adults who are terrible and some adults who are very irresponsible and all kinds of things, there are also some really good adults in this series, or in this book. There are some adults who are very present in the kids' lives, who will stand up for the kids, who are just like responsible human beings and responsible adults, and I feel like that's something that is a lot of times lacking in a lot of books. I really enjoyed this one. I gave it like 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was a very high 4.5. It was really good. I am really looking forward to reading the next book in the series. And the last book that I read in July was The Fire Opal Mechanism by Fran Wilde. So this takes place in a world where there are magical stones that are in the earth, and they like can whisper to you, and so they have powers, but they can also like whisper in your mind and drive you mad. And in this one, we're following 3 characters. So there is a thief, a librarian, and a pressman. and that's something that's specific to this world. So in this world, there is this movement where they are trying to, essentially they want to destroy all books that currently exist and then print a new book that they call, I think, the Compendium of Knowledge, that has all of the knowledge that exists in one book. And their initial premise for this is that libraries and schools and books hoard knowledge and keep people from learning what they could as a way of maintaining power. And so what they want to do is destroy all of the schools and all of the libraries and all of the current books and only create these compendiums of knowledge and distribute them throughout the world so that everybody can learn anything they want at any time. But the way that they go about this becomes horrible, that they are persecuting people, they are hunting people down, and anybody who is caught with a book can be persecuted because of it and harmed, and like it just blows up and becomes this like really horrible thing, as you might imagine something like that would. So we're following this librarian who is the librarian at one of the last libraries in existence, and the pressmen are trying to destroy her library. There is a thief who is trying to find a last few books that she can trade to the pressmen for money or passage to another country, but she encounters the librarian. They accidentally run into a clock that has, or a watch that has one of these magical jewels in it, which is able to transport them through time. And so they start being transported through different periods of time and seeing over like centuries the evolution of this movement and of the pressmen, and they have to decide, are they going to try to change the past or not. But we are also following one of the pressmen. So there is this guy who has joined the pressmen, and because he believes in their cause, he can figure out how to fix the press that they have. So they have a press that can remove the ink from books, and they also have a printing press for printing this compendium of knowledge. And this one, you know, I think all of that sounds really interesting. I think with my experience with Fran Wilde's books, which this is the only second one I've read by her, but my experience with them is that I like her ideas a lot. I like her premise. Her worlds are really interesting. I like what she was doing with this. I think it could have been really interesting and brought up some really interesting ideas that could be really thought-provoking. I don't like her execution of it. There's always something about the writing that never quite works for me, and I have a hard time putting up my finger on what it is. But I always feel like her execution doesn't fully explore the world and the magic, and it never delves as deep into it as I wanted to. And I want to know more about this world and this magic because it sounds so interesting, and I never get as much as I want. So this one I gave 3.5 out of 5 stars because like there was so much potential, and I think it had so many interesting ideas. And you know, I love how like creepy and mysterious these stones are. I just want more every time I read these. And last, I'm just going to really quickly run through the 3 DNFs that I had this month. I'm not going to really talk about them, but the first one was the audiobook for Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. The second was Druids by Morgan Llewellyn, which I was very disappointed that I couldn't get into this one. And the last one was The Forest of a Thousand Lanterns by Julie C. Dow. And this was an audiobook as well. So these ones, I might make a video at some point that is about DNFs and like why I DNF'd books. So let me know if you're interested in like knowing why I DNF books, because I am planning to like get better at DNFing, so there may be more DNFs in the future. So that is all of the books that I read in July. I did have, you know, a good number of kind of mediocre books, but I also had a few that I really enjoyed. I had a really fun time reading the Monsters of Verity duology. I really liked Disenchanted. So like there were some highlights. So that is all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.